kinds of negligence in the Nigerian law of tort. The first are the kind that are classified as the mental elements in different kinds of tort, and the second is the broad concept of negligence in the Nigerian law of tort. Greetings, legal minds, and welcome once again to the lecture hall brought to you by MS Legal Nuggets. For the purpose of this tutorial session, we will be demystifying and explaining the broad concept of negligence in the Nigerian law of tort, so you can properly understand what this entails. Firstly, what is negligence? Because most times as laymen, when you say someone is negligent, you try to interpret that in meaning that the person is actually careless. It is important to note that negligence in the Nigerian law of tort goes beyond just carelessness, because as defined by Lord Wright in Gelly, Iron and Co. versus Macmillan, he said that negligence goes beyond mere heedless conduct. That was the disclaimer that he gave in that particular case, in that particular precedent. He was trying to explain that negligence in the Nigerian law of tort isn't just about carelessness. Yes, carelessness is a factor in the broad concept of the tort of negligence, but carelessness is not what defines negligence. He now went on to define that negligence goes beyond mere heedless conduct. It connotes a complex concept of duty. One. Secondly, the breach of that duty. Two, thirdly, and damages caused as a result of that breach. That means if you want to come to a proper definition and analysis of what negligence is, we must do that while identifying the essential elements of this particular tort. So therefore, when we're speaking about negligence, like I already said, it is important to distinguish the broad concept of the tort of negligence from the mental element. One of the first things you will be taught in the Nigerian law of tort is actually the mental element in tort. The first is the intention, the second is negligence, and the third is strictly liability tort. In negligence, we can see, for example, in the tort of trespass to chattel, that trespass to chattel consists of a wrongful interference onto the property or chattel of another, either intentionally or negligently. The negligence that we are required to prove to establish the tort of trespass to chattel in that particular context is not what we refer to as the broad concept of negligence. So we were speaking about the broad concept of negligence in light of the definition that Lord Wright have already established. Negligence connotes a complex breach of duty. One. Secondly, for you to establish the commission of the tort of negligence against the defendant, you must also prove that there was a breach of that duty that was owed to you by the defendant. And thirdly, you must also establish that damages was caused as a result of that breach. Firstly, what is the concept of duty? The first thing that the plaintiff must establish to be successful in an action for the tort of negligence is that there was actually a duty of care that was owed to him by the defendant. You see, the fact that the defendant was careless does not guarantee that the plaintiff would actually be successful if it was established that based on that factual circumstance, the defendant never owed the plaintiff a duty of care. So this is the first question that the court usually asks to determine whether or not there is actually a commission of this broad tort of negligence. Was there a duty of care owed to the plaintiff? As established by the learned Justice Lord Atkin in Donogwe and Stevenson, it is important to note that every man owes a duty to take care with respect to acts and omissions that he reasonably foresee can affect his neighbor. And in that same ruling, he also established that a neighbor refers to persons who would be directly affected by your act or omissions. That means that for the duty of care to be established, we are not necessarily establishing this in light of the relationship between the plaintiff and the defendant. We are not really trying to establish this in light of the discussions between the plaintiff and the defendant. We are trying to take a look at the circumstance. Does the circumstance infer that this person is actually your neighbor? And once the circumstances establishes that, and it is seen that you are in breach of that duty and damages was caused, you would be liable for the tort of negligence. Just the question that is to be asked. For the fact that there was a duty of care does not guarantee that the action for the tort of negligence will be successful. The second question the court would ask is that the defendant actually breached that duty. This second concept of the breach of duty is one of the most difficult things that is usually proven, because to determine this, the court would conduct the reasonable man's test so as to check whether a reasonable man in that situation would act otherwise than the defendant had acted. And if it was seen that the required standard of care in that particular circumstance, the defendant actually acted below the standard of care that is required of him, thereby leading to damages caused, to be established that he has breached that duty of care. And we are speaking about the reasonable man test. We are not trying to analyze the biological reaction rate of the defendant. We are not trying to analyze the intelligence quotient of the defendant. We are trying to analyze what a reasonable man in that particular situation would do. And when it is found that the defendant actually reached that standard of care in his act or omission, thereby leading to some damages caused, he will not be liable for the tort of negligence. And for it to actually properly conduct the reasonable man test, there are 4 things that the court considers. This is known as the risk factor. First factor that the court considers so as to determine whether the defendant actually reached the required standard of care that is expected of a reasonable man is actually the likelihood of harm. If in that situation it is found that the defendant's act would likely cause harm, the standard of care in that situation based on what a reasonable man would do would be higher than it should be. The second is actually the seriousness of the injury that one of the cases that falls under this particular concept. We found out that a particular company was held liable, a particular employer was held liable for failure to provide goggles for its employee, because based on the kind of work that the employee was doing and for the fact that the employee had only one eye, the seriousness of injury that was risked required a reasonable man in that situation to amount up to a particular standard of care that would be higher than that of the employee based on his normal intelligence quotient. The third is actually the utility of the defendant's conduct. The court usually weigh the importance, the value of the defendant's conduct to the injury that is risked. This is seen in situations where ambulances and police vehicles are expected to act lower than what is expected of a normal person, because in that situation their actions are of great social value. For example, an ambulance that is taking the sick person to the hospital is not expected to drive with the way a reasonable person on the road will drive, because that particular act is very, very important in the society. And the last risk factor is actually the cost, the measures that is supposed to be taken for the defendant to prevent the harm. If the measures that are supposed to be taken by the defendant is so expensive that a reasonable man would not be expected to follow those measures, the standard of care would be reduced in that particular case, in that particular dispute. And the last thing that the plaintiff must prove to be successful in an action for the tort of negligence is that damages was actually caused as a result of that breach of the duty owed. Negligence is not actionable per se, so therefore damages must be proven, and these damages is proven by showing some specific losses that you incurred as a result of that particular act of negligence, that particular act of carelessness. And the test that is usually used by the court is called the remoteness test. That is called the remoteness of damages and the causation. The causation is simply the conduction of the but-for test. In the causation, the court is just trying to link the act of the defendant to the damages that was caused, and if there is found to be no actually causation link, if it is found that it is not really the act of the defendant that caused the damage, if it is found that even if the defendant did not act in certain way, even if the defendant did not act in that particular circumstance, the damages will still be caused by some other factors, the defendant would not be liable. And the remoteness of damages is simply the one that is used to determine the amount of compensation that will be given to the defendant for the damages and loss that was incurred, such that the plaintiff would only be entitled to the damages that are reasonably foreseeable from the defendant's act. So these are just the basic principles you need to know about the tort of negligence, and the proper understanding of this has been able to create a roadmap of the things that you are supposed to study in the tort of negligence so as to stay prepared for your exams. Thank you so much for your time. Do also follow us and subscribe to this channel to be updated when more insightful knowledge and legal tips are sent.